All right, it's 8:01. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our fireside chat today. And today we're going to be talking about 1 year since the explosion of generative AI, right? And what does that mean for the CPG industry? And will this hype die down? My name is Michelle, and I'm the growth director at AI Palette. I'm thrilled to be here with you today to explore this exciting topic. Now, before we dive in, to keep this session smooth and productive, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll address them towards the end of our chat. So let's get started with a brief introduction of our esteemed panelists today. First up, we have Shrikant Sridhar. Shrikant is the director within the strategic practice at EY Parathanan. He advises clients across corporate and private equity sectors in the area of strategy, transactions, digital, and innovation led growth. Prior to this, he was an associate partner at PA Consulting, focused on strategy formulation and transaction advisory around green tech, renewables, and sustainability. He co founded Anagram Consulting, which was acquired by BIP SPA Group in 2021. Welcome, Shrikant. All right. So now we have next is Jerome Linder, so the APAC head for consumer and market insights at OFI, a global leader in food and beverage ingredients. Jerome brings in over 20 years of experience working with major brands like Nike, Unilever, and Coca-Cola. He's known for blending traditional and contemporary methodologies to inspire innovation. Welcome, Jerome. All right, and last we have Malay Shah, the Chief Business Officer at AI Palette. Malay has extensive experience leading and scaling sales and revenue functions at high growth startups and has previously worked with companies like EY, Alvarez and Marcel, Infosys, and McKinsey. Welcome, Malay.
Michelle, glad to be.
All right. So now let's jump in. Over the past year, generative AI has had a significant impact on the consumer packaged goods industry, driving innovation and efficiency. According to a recent McKinsey report, companies that use AI in their operations see an average cost reduction of 10 to 20% and an increase in productivity by up to 40%. To kick things off, Jerome, can you share a brief example of how generative AI has already impacted operations or product development strategies at OFI and with CPG companies that work with you?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for having me. I think in terms of as far as insights is concerned, and obviously I work also kind of closely with marketing, but let's not forget I work also in a B2B kind of environment. So I work a lot with CPG companies who are kind of my clients, and obviously B2B and insights within B2B and marketing. So we've seen definitely in the past 12 months, major kind of ramping up of using AI and AI tools kind of across the spectrum. A lot of marketing, it started with content writing and things like that, but also in terms of research from an insights perspective. If you take a step back and think about what insights is really, it's about finding information. It's informing kind of a team, right? But it's a informing, but there's confirmation of information that we already know that we constantly need to kind of confirm. Then there's discovery, trying to find these unmet needs, for example, prediction, forecasting what's going to happen next, and then things like storytelling, right? So all of these things, AI can help and has a role to play into helping these kind of four areas. But there's some areas where it's doing a better job already, and some areas where it's not really doing yet a good job, right? So if you think about the information confirmation type of stuff, there's loads of data out there. So where there's loads of data, AI can just scan through and give you kind of a quick answer, and that's where you have kind of these you can build dashboards and you can scan a lot of information, create content, etc. For example, storytelling also very good. People can use Copilot and build a presentation in 2 seconds and stuff like that, right? Write a narrative. Where it comes to discovering and prediction, then it's a little bit harder. It's really depends what you're trying to do, how much information is available, and things like that. So there's still some work that needs to be done, right? And then if you take the NPD process as a whole as well, from idea generation, concept development, and then kind of building strategy, testing, commercialization, etc. AI can play again a role in all of these places. And as you mentioned, working with Unilever, I know they do a lot of stuff that's kind of more down the line. Use already AI in terms of pricing, in terms of where to position, and take the distributors that they work with. I'm obviously based in Asia, so you have all the big local Amazons, whether they're in China or the Tmall's and stuff like that, where there's sit on a huge amount of data, right? So they can use AI very well to help with distribution of the product, but also in terms of concept development, right? So that is happening now. I work much more the upfront of that process, which is about around idea generation, concept testing, etc. And as we'll see throughout this conversation, I'm not going to tell you everything right away, but we use AI in different ways, whether it's for idea generation, screening, concept testing, etc. And AI Palette is well positioned to do these, to help us do these kind of things. But there are other tools that are available. So yeah, that's kind of the spectrum kind of introduction I can give to AI and the way I see it being used, whether in B2B or in CPG.
Correct. And that's great insights, right? The fact that AI is now being implemented from insights to actually building the concept to actually product development and innovation, the overall package, right? Well, I would love to have your thoughts on this and your take on this as well.
Let's look back over the last 1 year, right? I mean, it's very hard to just keep up with all the new developments which have been happening. I mean, of course, there are lots and lots of developments happening on the technology side, but more importantly, there are lots and lots of developments happening in terms of application of their technology in CPG industry. And if I were to just take a step back, right, and talk about the big problem that CPG companies have, or traditionally had, was that they were always 1 degree removed away from consumers. I mean, there was always a retailer in between. And then when, Jerome talks about some of the emerging markets, like India, you have, massive complex distribution chains with distributor and 2 tiers of distribution. And by the time you get to consumers, you are maybe 2 degrees, 3 degrees removed away, from an end consumer. And CPG companies always found it hard to really understand the pulse of consumers. And it was always through A/B testing, right? So you put things on shelf. I mean, you of course invest a tons of money and lots of dollars on R&D and formulation and all of that, and see what really works, in terms of your rate of sales when you put things on the shelves. That has been the traditional approach, and as a result of which, they've been losing 80-90%. I mean, in terms of the failure rate in terms of getting the right products out there in the market, largely on the back of not being able to understand consumers and consumer pulse really well. They being removed 1 degree away from end consumers. To compound that, I think if we were to talk about ingredient companies, right? I mean, they are 2 degrees removed away from the end consumer at a minimum. So I think one big transformation that at least that we are seeing when we talk to a lot of our clients and the way we enable our clients is, in some sense, the AI and Gen AI in particular is providing that level playing field. It's allowing CPG companies to understand what's trending in the market more real time, and largely on the back of course, they have lots and lots of their own data. But think about it. I mean, there are 2 billion people on Instagram, 3 billion people on WhatsApp, and let's not even talk about how many people are on Amazon, and how many people are there on Grab and Gojek and Swiggy and DoorDash all around the world, right? So there's so much amount of digital footprint that us as consumers are leaving, that if you are able to harness all of that, then you are able to capture, which flavors are trending, what themes are trending. You can potentially look at, what are the things which consumers are concerned about? Is it salt? Is it sugar? From a health perspective, what are they looking from cognitive capabilities perspective? So that's the real power that Gen AI has been able to bring is to be really able to understand the consumer pulse. And I'll share maybe one or two stories very, very briefly. Is that one of our large alcoholic beverage clients, they when they look at product line extension, previously they would do like a 6 month of deep consumer research surveys, consumer panels to be able to understand, saying, what are the things that people would prefer in the market. Now they are able to do all of that using AI in, like, within few days and few weeks of time. Of course, from a technology perspective, it's actually within few minutes and hours. And then really being able to understand, saying, hey, whether it's yuzu or whether it is grapefruit, as a flavor that would trend for their, let's say, low alcoholic beverage flavor, or when they are trying to sell into, let's say, very premium Chinese consumers, and they want to understand what they think about when they think about premium whiskey or premium liquor. They are able to get those insights again at the end of their, fingertips, rather than going through a fairly long process. So it is definitely cutting down the cycle times. It's allowing them to understand the end consumer trends much better. And as a result of which, then they are able to bring all of that capability inside their R&D organization, inside their marketing organization, to be able to react to it and address the market needs a lot more faster. So yeah, that's my view. Michelle, would love maybe if there are any other thoughts as well, Shrikant, that you have as well here.
I think Malay and Jerome, you guys covered it pretty well. I think if I were to just sort of contribute my 2 cents on that, I think the biggest difference in this revolution of technological breakthrough is, unlike most of the technological forms, this is one that is actually driven by consumers. So if you look at traditional analytics, if you were to go back into the era of traditional ML and AI, it was all mostly a revolution that was led by the enterprises. Okay. Now, because the consumers have found the convenience of using this application, if it can be rendered also back to the consumers in a more palatable way, the adoption rates are going to be much more significant. And we are seeing that across different forms of CPG. If we kind of dwindle away from the FMCG into, say, fashion apparel, luxury, so on and so forth, there's a lot of consumer engagement that is being driven or being uptaken at this point in time with the advent of Gen AI. So I think it is going to be, technically speaking, there will be a lot of overlap between the historical patterns of AI in the way that technology would manifest. But then in terms of adoption rates are concerned, I think we're kind of following a pretty different trend line here when it comes to generative AI. Yeah.
Great. To your point, Shrikant, it's been like even Gartner has recently indicated that only 56% of consumer good companies have currently prioritized AI-driven product development just in the last year, right? Now, having noticed that the adoption is still growing, it's not yet there. How do you suggest to prioritize which aspects of consumer good life cycle, to apply generative AI between product concept creation to market launch? Where would the prioritization be focused on?
Sure. I think before we go on to prioritization of the use cases, let me just sort of set the stage in terms of bringing everybody to understand, what is the typical process of evolution when a breakthrough of this order happens, and most importantly, what is the nuance difference in this breakthrough vis-a-vis the other breakthroughs that we've seen, be it SaaS, be it traditional IML, whatever, right? So if you were to just simply visualize, I'm trying to do a bit of a difficult job without having a visual slide here, but let me just give my best shot here. So if you were to visualize an S curve, starting from the bottom of the X and the Y axis and then moving up and then curving on the top, that is the typical pattern that we found that most technological evolution takes form into, okay? In the initial phase of the S curve, we have a rejection point because most new technologies are typically first embraced by growth stage startups, seed-funded small firms. Basically, the startup ecosystem starts adopting some of these technologies, and they become the first hurdle to decide whether this technology has potential versus not. Okay, and once they've passed that test, and the test is kind of moved on, then the next wave of companies that will basically start adopting and trying to experiment are going to be the large enterprises. Okay, and provided if they feel that there is a value, then the technological curve kind of moves upwards into a point what we call as the inflection point. And this inflection point is dependent on 4 specific factors. Number one, there needs to be exorbitant amount of capital adequacy available to evolve the ecosystem. Number two, the adoption rates has to be growing not on a linear scale, but on an exponential scale. Number three, it needs to have some degree of clarity in terms of whether if there is a value in adopting this technology versus not. And then number four is that the functional explosion of the capability has to be quite wide and it should not be too narrow. Okay. And we see that generative AI is now just past this inflection point because all these factors are being supported quite adequately. Okay. Now, having said that, now when it comes to adoption, as in why is that the adoption is still 40 to 50%, which is still a large number considering the technology is still in its infancy, took birth about 18 months ago, December 2022. Before that, no one knew about this. The reason being twofold. Okay, the first reason is, it's the kind of use cases that companies start visualizing. Okay, for simplicity's sakes, I would classify the use cases into four different form factors. Okay, the first form of use case is what I call as leveraging personal data and trying to do something with it. The likes of a co-pilot, the likes of a chat GPT, so on and so forth, right? It's mostly kind of dwindling on personal data where people are trying to see, can I use my personal data to do something? And organizations also trying to see how can we ensure that we make, email communications easier? How can we make customer service easier? So on and so forth. And the next kind of use cases we talk about is what you would basically try to use generative AI to triangulate between different data sets to arrive at net new insights, which you probably kind of were able to do it in your past life, but the effort to get this to market was quite significant. Okay. Now, generative AI has made that journey a lot more seamless, a lot more quicker, although there are some gaps, but it will eventually start getting addressed as we evolve forwards. The third is where things start becoming a bit more exciting and interesting. The third wave is use cases where companies will start leveraging generative AI to identify different adjacencies. What can I do with the hordes and volumes of data that I've got with my company, triangulated with an external data set to arrive at something which probably could generate new revenue, help me enable a new product or a new service, so on and so forth. And the fourth, which I'm personally kind of very excited about, is what I call as high cognition and high consequential decision making, which is how can I leverage generative AI? We saw this in the case about 4 weeks ago with CRISPR-Cas as a protein being invented, which typically took us about all the time that humans took up until 2013, and then it took us only about 4 weeks to get to CRISPR-Cas1. Okay, and that is the power of the technology in terms of driving high cognition, high consequential decision making. Now, at this point in time, most companies are kind of have kind of tried their hands on the personal data space. Everybody's got their co-pilots going on, being implemented across organizations, so on and so forth. And then they've now started to transition into the triangulation of data set spaces, where, as Jerome did allude to this, how do I basically, converge on all the market insights I've got and, leverage AI and generative AI to arrive at, quicker concepts for products, and then do my market testing relatively quicker so that my R&D cycle time for NPD is being significantly shrank. Okay, but I think we're probably about 2 to 3 sequential quarters from where the inflection into the third wave will kick off. I mean, we're kind of also playing a prediction game here, so don't hold me on any of the quotes and trailing on the markets and the sorts. But personally, I see that we're probably about 2 to 3 quarters before, in terms of where this inflection could take place.
Absolutely right. So as all of this is basically reducing the entire cycle process of getting that product launched in the market, right? In the back of it, the data is of course extremely crucial, right? And in all of this, Jerome, I'd really like to understand with your long-standing work with OFI, right? In what ways has your company leveraged generative AI to analyze, interpret complex consumer data, and how has this influenced your product innovation process?
Yep, no problem. I think just to put a little context. So I my job is insights, right? So mainly consumer insight, market insights as well. So market insights is pretty easy because it's big data sets of numbers that I just need to crunch, and AI and existing tools allow me to quickly make some market sizing and growth predictions and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the easy bit. The harder bit is more on the consumer data, because consumers, and this is the lovely side of our job, is that consumers are in constant evolution and changing, and culture has an impact. So consumers in China will be different than consumers in Germany and things like that. So we constantly need to adjust, right? So so that's where it becomes kind of interesting, right? And my job is to collect this information, but it's also important to understand what audience I need to give it to, right? So first we have people from innovation who create kind of the new products, whether it's internally or with my customers, marketing teams, and salespeople. And each of these people will use the information I give in a kind of a different way, right? So so I have to not only crunch lots of data, but the output that I'm asking from the machine or from people needs to understand that and needs to adapt to that. So I think that's where the kind of critical things is happening. I also I'm as I mentioned, I'm based in Asia, and it's probably quite different from my experience in the US and in Europe previously. Is that here, and I'm not talking about the key accounts, key clients that would the international brands that I work with, because that's more or less the same in Europe, but also in Asia, big food companies, etc., don't have the same means or the same ways of working that you have in Europe and the US, in the sense that they don't have necessarily insights, right, or trends and stuff like that. So if I went to Starbucks or if I go to Mondelez and stuff like that, I bring in insights and trends and stuff like that, but they have their own trends. And it works when, okay, there's some things where we confirm each other, and then it's interesting where the bits where we do things a little bit different. Oh, you spotted something I don't have, and then that becomes interesting. But for a lot of Asian clients, then it's the first time they see something, and then you're actually basically kind of advancing ideas against their own kind of understanding of their market. So it's kind of a very different thing. So you need to you really need data that comes straight from the consumers. You need to be able to show something that they've already seen in a different way that you really do with account managers. And also, most importantly, you need to really do it at speed, because in Asia, and I don't know how it is in Europe anymore because I haven't been there in the past 3 years, but in Asia, things go very quickly. If you're doing NPD in China, you have 3 weeks to do something, and and it's out in the factory, and 2 months later it's on the shelves and stuff like that. So it goes really quickly. So we need to be able to do this at speed. So obviously AI is a good tool to support us, right? And I think it goes from well, first, you use AI to do quick understanding of needs, right? So I can use a chat GPT or something like that, or similar tool, if the same way I would do a desk research. You start from insights, you're like, okay, well, I'll give you an example. We had a project about Christmas in Asia, typical thing. Every June you have to prepare for Christmas, right? So, quick chat GPT, what are the different trends around Christmas? Christmas is not the same as the US or Europe. It's not something that there's no heritage of Christmas here, so it's been kind of acquired by the different cultures. So you really need to understand the nuances and stuff like that. And a chat GPT, going through a lot of data is super helpful to give you a first understanding of how China do Christmas versus Indonesia, and then you can drill down into the types of dishes they eat, the ingredients they use, the type of celebrations they do, how long it lasts, and stuff like that. So that would be, this kind of a starting point, and allows you to form your hypotheses and stuff like that. But again, you can't just take that and run, right? Because if you take that and run and go and present, hey, you guys in Indonesia are doing this and doing that, some people look at you with a weird face, because, depending on the sources that ChatGPT found, it could be a bit of a weird story that you have to tell, and you look a bit silly. So you really need to still do the work, right? But then there are the more elaborate stuff that you need to do. And so recently we had to do something on claims and try to understand what natural meant, for example, across different cultures and stuff like that. So ChatGPT is not going to help you do that. It might give you a general idea, but then you have to kind of drill down into like specialized tools that someone like Mintel, like AI Palette provide, that help you kind of understand these nuances and how actually people talk about it, right? And straight from the horse's mouth, stuff that AI Palette does is really about understanding what people are saying and the words that they are using to talk about naturalness in those different countries and across those different categories and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to do that and use social data, those Google searches and things like that, but also anything that kind of exists, science papers as well, depending on what you're looking at. So if you're looking at different claims, there's plenty of tools that exist. You to just harvest and scan through that and get some really interesting outputs that come into that. But it's all down to also the questions, the prompts that you do. You want to challenge it. You want to ask what's not just, oh, what's trending, but maybe what's not trending, or what's the danger of this thing, or what are the challenges associated with this and stuff like that, because otherwise it doesn't give you a complete picture. So it's a lot of that, quick understanding. And this does not replace anything. It just makes us do that part much quicker. So we can actually spend much more time on the stuff that adds value, right? Which is about the thinking, the idea generation, the gathering information where you have some blind spots and stuff like that. So it's really about this reduction of time, and I wouldn't say cost, because actually maybe that's spend less on that, we probably spend more on that, but the return on investment is much better, right? So, and then there's stuff like looking at hard to see connections, and this is I'm going to talk about AI Pilot because I use AI Pilot, but it's a good tool to do that. Is the stuff that are they make connections between ingredients and themes, for example, right? And that's the stuff that it's very hard to find elsewhere, where if it's not in that social data where people talk about, oh well, I went to Starbucks and had the cinnamon latte and it made me feel happy, or I was cold and it warmed me up and stuff like that. So okay, these are easy assumptions to make, but it's good to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, right? And this is more or less in real time, so it becomes interesting. But it has its challenges because maybe not everyone goes on social media to talk about their experiences of products. So it works well maybe for coffee, but maybe a bit less for deodorants, for example. I don't know how many people talk about their experience with their deodorant online. I doubt a lot of people do that, but so that kind of stuff, right? And then concept development, I think, is great. And again, just completely something that AI Palette is doing as well. But this is other people have this kind of service. I like the idea of using this massive amount of data, which actually gave you the insights in the first place, that you actually craft something and then put it back out there to test it, right? Does it actually correspond to those little, all these multiple connections that you made, and can you help me do that? And it also helps me, write the concepts, and then I can also use AI to create the images that I want to put in marketing and stuff like that, right? Now, I talked about all this, but this is all qualitative kind of data that exists out there. And you'll notice that I don't speak a lot about quantitative data. I would like AI to work better with quantitative data, but I don't think it's very good right now, or it's very expensive. But I'm thinking, I'm doing a survey right now across all of Asia, and I don't have a ready tool to analyze my data and spit out some, I still need to do my research and connect the dots in my Excel sheets. That off the shelf doesn't exist. You actually have to create it, or the service provider gives you something that kind of is that, but then you have to trust it, and do you trust it and stuff like that. So that doesn't exist. So I think those are kind of the challenges. But I think just going back to your question in terms of data, there's a whole lot of data existing out there, and there's Gen AI, the Chat GPTs. Now, the thing is that they are, for me, they are trained on general information, so they will give you a general output, right? And then you have smaller sets of data that are more concentrated, and like food, for example, food specific insights, and then then that kind of data will give you much more specific type of information. But then there might be a lot of more blind spots in that thing. So there's kind of a trade-off there. But the beauty of the social data is the real-time aspect of it, because let's not forget that until what was it, a year ago, any kind of market research, consumer research was historic data, right? And oftentimes an innovation came out in January, had 6 months of creation, if not more, based on consumer research that was done in October of 14, 16 months before the innovation, right? And as I said, consumers change more or less fast, depending on what generation you're looking at and what question you're trying to answer. But now we don't need that. We can have a kind of almost real-time dashboard of what's happening.
All right, perfect, right? So we've got the data sources, and then we have AI that we're now focused on, accelerating the analysis for us to give us those trends in the market, right? But we are still facing integration, right? Integration concerns, right? So integrating AI comes with its own set of challenges. So Shrikant, I would love to understand from you, right? What are the biggest barriers for adoption faced in integrating generative AI into operations, and how can that be addressed as well?
Sure. Okay. I think if I were to just sort of simplify, there are basically two different kinds of barriers I would want you to visualize. Okay. The first barrier is what I call as the enabling factors that will come into enabling you to get your generative AI into production. The second are the core factors. Okay. Put together, we're talking about 6 or 7 different barriers. Okay. In the enabling factor space, just segueing from the point that Jerome made on data, I think that has been one of the major stumbling blocks. Companies come in all kinds of spectrum, which is, they've got some parts of their data ecosystem in place, kind of tuned up and propped up for AI consumption for all the use cases, especially in CPG, who are generally a mature user of AI relative to other industries or sectors. But by and large, data engineering, build out of pipeline, orchestration of data remains one of the sizable constraints. Okay. The second is, to do with the elements surrounding the compute, because ML and AI, the traditional AI and ML algorithms that were to be run did not necessarily require dedicated compute of a special form factor. Now, because generative AI is such where the compute load is just extremely high, your ability to access the desired level of compute and the implicable cost associated with that, and most importantly, the latency that is associated with the provisioning of the compute, depending on the kind of use case you want to render. Now, what I mean today, say that now is, if I were to just sort of exemplify, if you want to enable a customer service use case enabled by voice, you're effectively kind of constrained by having compute availability that allows you to render speech within anywhere between 120 to 150 milliseconds of latency. Okay. Now GPUs typically can't render that kind of latency, so then you are kind of putting yourself on alternates to GPU, like such as an LPU or looking at a smaller language model, so on and so forth. So the technical complexity to achieve latency for specific kind of use case enablement is not very straightforward. Now, if I move towards the core factors, that kind of opens up, doors for about 3 different constraints. One is on the choice of model that we want to make. Whether are we going to go for a proprietary closed model? Are we going to go and try out on an existing available open source model? And now there's a whole deluge of small and mid-sized models available in the market. Which one do we go and latch onto, and how do we sort of make the right decision that allows us to pane out the ecosystem in a more structured, coherent way in the future, so that we don't kind of, end up in a significant cost clutter, probably 3 or 4 years down the line. Okay. The second is the exponential cost that is required to enable all of these capabilities now over and above the existing IT spend that organizations are going through, which means that the whole budgetary reforecasting and restructuring is essential. Okay. Now you may decide to there are multiple ways of doing this. You may decide to do a left pocket to right pocket. You would squeeze out some spend that you're making towards a certain kind of a solution today, and then try to allocate it towards your Gen AI projects, so on and so forth. But there is a cost structuring, process, which is actually slowing down the initial process, which is, I would not say it was kind of unanticipated. It was meant to happen, and it rightfully so is happening at the moment. And the third factor is everything to do with responsible or safety with regard to AI, including everything to focus on supervision of models, observability of models, and the safety of the models in terms of its ability to deal with biases. Okay. Now, wherever there is any engagement that is being discussed with regard to a consumer, customer service companies, the consumer packaged goods companies are extremely careful in terms of ensuring that the bias doesn't actually move out. And what they've tried to call as an innovation on one side could potentially basically tarnish their image on the other side. So that ecosystem is also quite on an evolutionary space at this point in time, because if you were to look at bias and responsible AI with regard to traditional ML and AI, it had a very different form factor than to look at 1.5 to 1.75 trillion parameter model and the bias associated with that. Okay. So all these factors put together is going to basically kind of, stagger down the pace of adoption rates. But I'm also kind of the opinion that when I look at each of these in isolation, I'm seeing that some of these areas, such as, say, for example, compute, there's been significant movement quarter on quarter. I mean, we've never seen this pace of the change happen in compute probably for all the time since I've been existential on this planet, right? So, we saw, companies coming up with, language processing units, which are probably about the 300x of the order of magnitude faster than the GPUs in terms of rendering voice. We are also looking at new architectures and compiler engines being built on the semiconductors. So rendering of the models is significantly faster on an existing GPU core itself. So a lot of these areas are moving at different paces, I would say. But I think, as I said, it would probably take us, more than a few quarters for the dust to completely settle in. But there is progress happening across the board.
Got it, right. And
Yeah.
Malay, I would like, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted Malay's thoughts on that as well. Malay, you've been working with CPG brands for over a year now, and I would love to hear your thoughts on how that collaboration has been.
Shrikant said is spot on. I mean, there is so much progress on the technology and the infrastructure. But I think the if we were to just put ourselves in the shoes of the user, um, we don't want to scare them away with all the kind of all the plumbing and all the infrastructure and all the things which are going underneath, right? So if you were to think about from a user perspective, I think what at least ChatGPT has done, and I think iPhone had done it, where we where we started forgetting to remember the phone numbers, for example. I think what ChatGPT has at least showed us the way is that the experience can be a single line, where you just put a prompt, right? Then it is up to us as engineers and as technologists to ensure that the plumbing actually works, to ensure that whether it is the world data combined with CPG sector data, or whether it is data within the four walls of the organization come together, whether how do we put all the guardrail layers on it in terms of the security, privacy. So we need to take care of all of that. But I think the biggest barrier for adoption is how can you make it as easy and as simple for users, right? And I would even go one step forward. So I think while prompt is one way where it can completely simplify the whole experience, whether you are dealing with enterprise scale data or whether you are dealing with world scale data. I think it can even go one step forward, which is to ensure that you even bring in all the recommendations, right? And which is what, let's say, Netflix experience has done for all of us. So you understand what the user has been trying to do through chains of prompts, and then now you recommend even before and predicting what the needs are. So I think I'm just taking that user apart, and in my view, I think the more simpler we make, I think that's what would really enable a much wider adoption, whether that adoption needs to happen in R&D, where people might be experts in food science, but they may not be expert in researching journals and doing all the indexing of the research papers and so on and so forth, or whether in marketing, right, where people are focused on campaigns and communications, but may not be focused on all the plumbing of the marketing system. So I think how can we make it easier? I think that's the number one factor that I've seen has been the barrier to adoption, and I think we're still not there completely. There's a lot of work that has to happen under the hood, but that's the ultimate vision, in terms of what we can do to drive adoption.
Absolutely. I think, Malay, if I may just sort of quickly chime in and complement that point, I think it's a great point that Malay is bringing about in terms of user interface. The current lay of the land is you have pretty much a unified user interface, whether you were to toggle between one model to another, barring the background color and the typeface that is being used. It is just still a chat screen. Okay. Now, not all use cases can be serviced with that kind of an UX. Okay. Having said that, a lot of work is going on. We see a lot of startups coming up, especially in the Valley, as well as in Europe and in London, where there are concerted efforts with AI native companies who are focusing on rendering the use case with a specialized UX. And I would like to call out this analogy. So, when Amazon came up as the first ever e-commerce bigwig. They were not traditionally a retailer. They did not have a background in retail. Okay, now if you fast forward about 25 years since the evolution of Amazon, it has still been the case that the age-old retailer is still not as good as Amazon on the UX. Okay, so the UX motion is kind of kicked off at the moment, and I think we are going to see that kind of coming and converging in over the quarters to follow through.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to add something because I think it's really interesting the point you're making, and I agree with everything you guys say, but I think there's one thing that we need to more important from a practical perspective. But I think that there's right now kind of this relationship that we're having and trying to figure out how we manage the magic that is produced, right? And I think a lot of people are like, ooh, like I can prompt and it just spits something else, and we don't really understand what's happening behind it. And so, it's just about how is it, it's too good to be true. A lot of people are thinking it's too good to be true. Others are just like running with it. And I think that because we're talking about adoption here, I think it's about kind of figuring out that thing, right? Because adoption comes from trust, and trust will come from the quality of the output and the value that it brings, right? And we've seen with ChatGPT is that they're really good at the output, but we don't really know what's behind it. And we've seen plenty of problems, and there are still going to be problems, and until that is kind of settled, and you can have a great UX, but at the end of the day, if the output is to be challenged, then we kind of have a bit of an issue. Like one also, because I obviously in insights, context is really important, but the good news is that AI does not give you context, right? Because it can't, it doesn't understand the concept of context, but means that humans still have an added value, and this is where it becomes really important, is that you can actually use this information and know what to do with it and put it in context, and that's where it becomes extremely valuable. But those who expect context or take things like that, if I looked at Christmas stuff and I just being like, oh well, it's Christmas, I'll just adapt any kind of Christmas to China, then that's not going to work with me because the context and stuff like that. So all of this is, I think it's also really important. Once we figure out that relationship between the magic, once the Wizard of Oz is kind of came out from behind, and then we can be like, okay, now I get how it works, and we'll be able to kind of use it or challenge it. That's even the good thing, is that people are starting to challenge it, building their own thing, and as well is works towards that.
All right, thank you, Jerome, for that. Thank you, everybody, for that. So, what we're getting here is that we know the value that is there. We know that there is a need. There is a value that's there when it comes to integrating AI. Right now, looking ahead, PwC has already mentioned that AI could contribute to 15.7 trillion USD to the global economy by 2030. Right. So, Jerome, I'd love to understand from you. Right, with emerging trends in generative AI, do you believe will have the most significant impact on consumer industry in the next 5 years?
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, I think, well, so I mean, and I think Shrikant already covered a lot of kind of the next step from technological perspective, and I can only speak from a user, right, and kind of an implementer as well. But I think we were talking in quarters, and I think we can talk in quarters. The next quarter, or the next quarters, and the next 12 months or even 18 months are going to be crucial, because this is kind of where we're going to start figuring things out, how it works and what doesn't work, what works, etc. There's going to be those who buy off the shelf kind of solutions, and those who build their own, and there's going to be a multiplication of these LLMs and stuff like that. So they're all going to, and then LLMs are going to then talk to each other, and there's going to be a chain of LLMs. It's going to get some output. What's that going to create? Is it going to be a mess? Is it going to work? I don't know. So a lot of things need to be sorted. So I think the near future is going to be that kind of dust settling. But the greatness about this is that there's also going to be new areas of opportunities that are going to pop out, and that's where it's going to be interesting, because that's what we do, and that's what entrepreneurs do, that's what innovators do, is they see these things, and there's going to be some really good tools that are going to come out of that, and so something to really look forward to. What I'm personally looking forward to, there's a few areas that and it's funny because we talk about Gen AI and the chat GPTs and stuff like that, and yeah, great, etc. But I actually see much more value in specialized AI, right? So the Gen AI is works on and every kind of information, tries to learn from that, and it's going to give you general kind of insights, right? But once you start focusing on food behaviors or personal care or travel or something like that, then the learning is specific to that, right? And therefore it's much more powerful in understanding the little nuances and things like that, and you can integrate other stuff with it and science, stuff like that. So ironically, what general AI was kind of the big thing that was like, that's the smart one, whereas narrow AI, what they used to call narrow AI, was the stupid one. I actually think that narrow AI is actually going to be more of a future. For me, I'm going to be much more interested in understanding someone that has learned a lot around food or around behaviors, around culture, and be able to connect those things than something that's very generic, the same way they already do with image or video and stuff like that. So that's going to be more interesting for me. I was talking about simulation, and I think this is probably a double-edged sword here, but the example I was giving earlier, where you have a huge amount of data and it can become a proxy to your target audience if you kind of manage or format it correctly and that kind of stuff. And then you can test your concepts, or you can use that as a proxy audience to test ideas and stuff like that, and kind of interact without talking to real people. Now, a lot of people out there are going to be like, what is he talking about? You're going to replace old people. I personally won't, because I love talking to consumers. If anything, AI has helped me, as I again said earlier, to save some time on the stuff that I don't want to do. So I actually can spend more time talking to real people, etc. But I think in terms of concept testing and ideas testing and that kind of stuff, we can also use in parallel to that, proxy consumer groups and et cetera. Now, the double-edged sword is we already have kind of synthetic data and this kind of stuff, which I don't like at all, but they're often based on small sample of information. But I think if we have along specialized AI later on that's specialized on food, on personal care, etc., then we can build kind of probably more representative, if you want, consumer groups that I can then test ideas and stuff like that. But all of this will only happen if we're able to format data properly, and that's also that's the biggest problem, because a lot of data, I mean, and you guys, Malay, know very well, because social data is very noisy, for example, but it comes in multiple shapes and forms, etc. So I was actually wondering whether in the future the inputs that we give is also not going to be influenced. So let's say people put on social media some stuff, maybe social media is going to start asking us different questions, or things like that, or format the way we input, and so then on the back end we'll have differently formatted questions, so AI becomes better at what it needs to do, and there's less noise and stuff like that. So that's kind of the three areas where I think the next things are going to happen in AI, so at least what I wish, in a certain way. Yeah.
All right, so it's very clear to us that AI is rampant in growth, especially in the near future. In fact, measured in quarters rather than years, right? Now, having said that, let's get on with our final question for today, and we'll keep a time check on that as well. And we kind of like to address this to you, right? So when it comes to generative AI, right? Let's discuss measuring success. Can you describe how companies measure the return on investment from deploying generative AI technologies, and what metrics or indicators are most valuable?
Right. Okay. So that's a very complicated question to begin with, and I'll try to keep my answer rather less complicated. Okay. So we, myself and my team, here in EY Patron, London, we've kind of spent oodles of time on cracking around this problem, and looks like we got an answer. So the way the answer kind of follows is the core assumption that we kind of built, which we sort of kind of hypothesized about 8-10 months ago, is the real mega rush of value will come as generative AI basically proliferates across the organization, across different application layers in their digital ecosystem, so to say. So before we go on to compute what could be the value that could be achieved by deploying generative AI, we had to first set a baseline on what is the value of deploying digital technologies. Okay, by digital, we've kind of classified them into very specific 4 different form factors. Number one, all those tools and technologies that you use today for digitalizing your process. Number 2 is all the task automation principles that you would be running on across CPG organizations, including RPA. Number 3 is all the traditional ML and AI algorithms that could have been deployed. And then the 4th is all the IoT wearables and robotics use cases that you might have already deployed across the value chain of a CPG organization. Okay. Now, the value chain of a CPG organization, for simplicity's sake, if you were to visualize, you could look at it from R&D, moving on through towards planning, followed by sourcing and procurement. Then you've got manufacturing, you've got logistics and distribution, sales and order management, and then marketing. Okay. And then you've got all the business enabling functions in the bottom. So when we sort of assess the value of all the digital technologies minus generative AI, okay, we came up with the conclusion that there is roughly about 150 to 170 basis points on revenue. So let's say if your revenue is about $100 billion, and then your EBITDA for typically the FMCG companies toggle anywhere between 16 to say about 25% on EBITDA, okay, there is roughly about 150 to 170 basis points of EBITDA upside on revenue basis that you could achieve purely from the digital embedded technologies, okay? And then this kind of allowed us to quantify the number of use cases we considered for the model, okay? We looked at 89 specific use cases spanning across the 4 different types I mentioned. And then we started to look at the value in 3 different clusters. What is the value that you would achieve from workforce productivity improvement? What kind of value could you decipher in terms of, direct cost optimization opportunities? And what is the value you could decipher from optimizing your asset utilization? Because CPG companies are, quite asset heavy in nature in terms of their manufacturing, their warehousing, all the fleet that they maintain, so on and so forth. Okay. And we then looked at individual use cases, and then we wore a Gen AI lens on top of that. Okay. Now, what does Gen AI, in simple terms, do? Is potentially the 5 things that I would talk about now. Number 1, it allows us to query insights using natural language. Okay. Number 2, it allows us to triangulate the data sets to arrive at net new insights. Okay. Number 3, it allows us to contextualize the insights, i.e., bring in some degree of explainability to the insight that you got. Number 4 is it allows us to generate new content, code, or any form of synthetic data. And number 5, it allows us to get to the initial set of call to actions, which may not be necessarily the final call to action you would take to market or you take to deploy, but you're probably 70 to 80% accurate, okay, at one go. Now, we assessed all the digital use cases, and if we thought there is going to be an overlay of generative AI on top of that, which of these augmentation principles could apply on the existing digital landscape in CPG companies, okay? The outcome of that model led us to conclude that roughly about as much amount of value add you had from digital, okay, is what we could expect from generative AI alone. Okay, that means now the potential upside on an EBITDA basis for CPG companies, including generative AI and digital, could be of the tune of anywhere between 300 to say about 375 basis points, which means that if, let's say, for example, a company has got an EBITDA of say about 18.5% on a normal scale, there is a potential to take their EBITDA by adopting generative AI across the landscape to a tune of roughly about 22%. So that gives them a sizable push in terms of their EBITDA potential. Okay. Now, we haven't, actually looked at the revenue side of the augmentation because it's kind of a double-edged sword. Number one is the technology is still not continued, not kind of arrived at some form factor of stagnation. So it is evolving quarter on quarter. So the modalities are changing. We saw the modalities almost double last month. Um, that means that the capabilities are also doubling. And then the second issue with the modeling revenue is there are a lot of external factors associated with potential for revenue augmentation. Okay, so we've kind of intentionally veiled away from modeling the revenue upside potential, but from an EBITDA upside potential, we are seeing a substantially large number. And we've got a view of what could happen to a company which is mid-size versus a small size versus a large scale, depending on their digital maturity, depending on their existing landscape, so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, I think the latest WWDC event from Apple was a great testimony of kind of the assumption that we made about 8 months ago, that if you look at what they've done with Apple is they've taken the iOS 17 and then done some augmentation on the operating system and then put a wrapper of OpenAI's GPD all over it. Okay, so pretty much every application that's going to run on your phone will have a GPD attribution to it. Okay, so we kind of modeled the value based on the same assumption, assuming that you would have large language models which will be rendering on different services through API calls across the entire enterprise application ecosystem, thereby enabling that degree of roughly about 100 to 150 basis points of net new potential on EBITDA upside for CPG companies. Now, of course, this varies from sector to sector, and we'll in some cases for even more asset-heavy sectors like say EPC or energy, oil and gas, renewables, and the sorts. We have the fourth potential value type, which is on capital efficiency as well, because there's a lot of capital being deployed. But for CPG, we consider asset utilization. What is the value from it? We're looking at workforce productivity. What is the value from it? And then total cost optimization. What is the value from it? And in the pecking order, cost optimization seems to be the highest potential area, followed by workforce productivity. We are looking at roughly about anywhere between 30 to about 90 basis points on workforce productivity, because we've spent a lot of time studying productivity, and our hypothesis is productivity is often misunderstood as if there is a 20% productivity improvement, you would probably get rid of 20% of people. That never often happens because there is always a collaboration tax that we all pay. And there's also another assumption that as productivity improves, companies are going to take the cash back and stay happily with it. That never happens often because you would then want to go and generate more revenue. So you've got to basically induce more activity. So effectively, it kind of converges into the infamous Jevons paradox. So, as the invention of coal said, the consumption of coal would reduce with the invention of steam engine, but then the consumption of coal actually exploded exponentially. So, for productivity, we're playing it a bit conservative, roughly between 30 to 90 basis points overall, but highest coming from direct cost rationalization opportunities.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much for that valuable insight, Shrikant. So now with closing summaries, I'm going to start off with Malay. I would love to hear your thoughts here on. So, yeah.
Well, these are mind-boggling numbers. I mean, although Shrikant is saying that this is conservative, but I mean they are still big numbers. I think the one point I would like to add here is we know when a technology has arrived when we actually stop talking about it, right? So we don't talk about steam engines or electricity or aviation turbine engines, or for that matter even cloud these days, right? I don't think we are there yet, but I think that's the real moment when it becomes like an integral part of our lives. And I think in some sense, example which Shrikant gave on WWDC, which is where the entire AI becomes an interface for your user experience, let's say with the phone. And similarly, Jerome talked about all the ways in which we can harness all the different data sets, but there are still real life problems that Jerome also highlighted, right? Like the structured data or industry specific data, and how do you cut noise, from the signal that you are getting, and so on and so forth. So it's a sign that it's not arrived, but I think all the different use cases that we talked about in terms of whether it is on new concept generation, idea screening, consumer insights, new product development, and then Shrikant talked about tons of other use cases on the entire supply chain and efficiency and automation play, which is out there. I think the real power of Gen AI is when it is getting embedded into each of those, specific functional areas, and then it is having compounded effect across the entire value chain, right? And that's where those, the numbers that Shrikant talked about would really get realized. We feel proud that we are contributing, to that particular evolution as well. But there's still some more way to go. Yeah, so that's my summary. I think lots of use cases. I think the important piece is 1 year after the the OpenAI moment last year, I think it is now moving more into the scale up mode as opposed to just doing the pilots. And actually, it's all about the ROI and business case realization, right? Which will be measured in terms of EBITDA numbers, and it's a board topic for so many different organizations as well. So we are in that stage. Lot to go further, but I think it's really now shifting into more into value realization mode at this stage.
Good, thank you, Malay. And now I'll ask Jerome as well, like, what's your final thoughts here on the last 1 year with generative AI?
I'll try to keep it short this time. I think for me, well, no, but it's, when it came out, it was like the Messiah, and the as I said, the Wizard of Oz, and it was going to solve a lot of problems, etc. And I actually really think it's more going to be like a super assistant, right? And if anything, it's going to make us smarter because we're gonna start doing things very quickly using AI. And that's going to save up some time, and we're going to have to start thinking differently, and there's going to be a whole lots of opportunities to find new ways of working and finding new insights, and there's a whole opportunity that I didn't go into, which is more like the behavioral stuff, and you're using smartwatches and where we are, what we're doing, and kind of all this kind of data, and we don't know how to harvest that data properly and kind of and use it, but there's plenty of areas that we still don't know about. So yes, super assistants in a way, and not just like a messiah, but we're going to become smarter. So that's a good thing.
Great, Shrikant, I'll have you close the floor there.
Yeah, I think for me it's been incredibly exciting. I started off kind of with a whole grassroots level understanding on how transformers work. I kind of started to really earth people down in terms of somebody who was non-technical by background, wanting to go and understand the technicalities of it, and that's how I understood, because I believe in that. And I think it's been incredibly exciting, and I've been trying to cover this topic across multiple different angles, ranging from how the capital financing is happening in the space, how the adoption rates are taking place, what are the sectoral nuances, how the technology technically has been getting up, ground up, and the sorts. And I think my view towards the end is this is probably one of the most significant events of the time, and I strongly believe in that. I mean, there are different schools of thought, but I belong to the school of thought as I stand today that it is very, very bullish, and it's looking like this is going to be a significant transformation of different sectors, not just CPG alone, and a whole deluge of new companies trying to do things in a very new form, and which the world would have probably never seen before. And it's really exciting to see all this happen at one go and at such a short pace. Although having said it, it's been extremely tiring because you miss a podcast or two, you miss a paper or two, and then you skip the whole beat. So it's kind of ongoing sprint as opposed to ongoing marathon. So, but I'm really, really excited.
Great. This has been so valuable in terms of insights, right? This has been really enlightening in terms of discussions and the impact of generative AI in the CPG industry, right? So now we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A section. I've already have a couple of them being directed already to us. So this one would be for you, Malay. How should we handle AI hallucinations, particularly when it comes to making claims in the consumer packaged goods sector?
I think Jerome talked about that a little bit earlier, which is AI sometimes becoming a black box, and I think the hallucination problem is real because it's not trained on a very specific data sets. It's trained on a generally publicly available data sets, and I think that's where it's very important that now you don't have to invest so much money in terms of a tool doing its reasoning or summarization and so on and so forth, which is where you still use large language models. But then you have to make it work. And there are different models out there in terms of building out a medium-sized language models or small language models or training the data sets in your own data sets. And then there are RAG methods as well, where you combine those two pieces to reduce the element of hallucination, right? So that's where it's important that you are able to bring in, let's say, for example, model which is trained on, let's say, CPG data sets and combined with, let's say, LLMs, and then being able to provide answer with referenceability. If you want to validate the claims that X percentage of consumers are saying Y or Z, is it coming from your own research? Is it coming from your consumer panels? Is it coming in from certain social data? So I think that referenceability is critical, and that's where you need to bring in those first party, second party, third party data sets together.
Yeah.
And
If
also, I think,
I may,
if I may just add 2 cents to it, I think on every use case, there is a spectrum of hallucination that you should be palatable about or not palatable about. Like the objective is not to get a perfect answer in most cases, and I don't think most use cases require or demand such an insight. So for those areas where there's an acceptable degree of hallucination and you know where exactly the model starts hallucinating, it's probably a better situation to be in. However, I think from a technicality standpoint of view, one of the challenges that the large language models are currently facing is as you keep updating net new data coming in, the net new data flow, the flow through rate is actually triggering new hallucinations. Okay. However, there are a lot of remediation measures coming in, especially on the model observability space. You can go and look up on the space, and there are plenty of new solutions that are currently being floated around, which will keep this process in check. Okay, and it will basically do some form of a remediation or a rehearsal before it actually allows the data to flow through it. Okay, but I think these are all teething problems, I would say, but they're not shell-shocking showstoppers, so to say. So quite bound to be there for a while. Stickiness will be there. We will come out of it.
Yeah. Can I just add 2 things on this very quickly? Well, I'm actually more concerned about the hallucinations we don't see, because the hallucinations that we see, they're often, a bit funny and stuff like that, but there's plenty of hallucinations we actually don't see because they seem kind of logical and stuff like that. And so, do a second prompt, dig a little bit deeper, and check as you guys both kind of highlighted, but also use the hallucinations, right? I mean, we use it. There's a battery of ideation techniques that you can use, and one of them, if you're doing more if you're looking for disruptive ideas and stuff like that, I would collect disruptions and use them as prompts for your ideation, because I've seen this and I've used it recently to, it's provocative. Sometimes it's completely out of the box, but it can make you think a little bit differently. So for those who are kind of in the NPD area and stuff like that, keep them aside, put them in a drawer, and laugh about them, but use them. You might get something out of it.
Right. Even though we've run short out of time here, but we still got intriguing questions coming in. So I'm going to take one last question here, and this is we'll start off with Shrikant with you on that, and then we can roll it off there. Are companies developing AI tools in-house or relying on off-the-shelf solutions such as AI Palette, which dictates decision?
Yeah, great question. I think so. The implementation pathway is broadly 4-pronged. Okay, the 4 different ways of actually deploying generative AI in production. The first form factor is what I call as embedded AI, which is if you were to visualize most of the enterprise systems, the likes of any of the ERPs, the CRMs, the PLMs, they're all coming up with their own embedded AI. Okay, but bear in mind these are enterprise product companies who are trying to retrofit AI into it and not the other way around. Okay, so there will be quite a few low-hanging fruits because these systems basically are the pass-through nodes for a deluge of information and data. So there are certain use cases which could be rendered using this embedded AI applications, which basically comes at relatively lower effort and time to market for adoption. Okay, the second form factor is what we call as the commercial off-the-shelf solutions. AI Palette could be one of them. There are a multitude of others in terms of different subsegments of focus across the value chain for CPG. Now, there is a lot of volatility in this space because every day there is a startup that's emerging somewhere in the world who claims to have that now we've kind of completely disrupted or short-circuited this process. And here is a holy grail of insight that we can release, and we can push ABC metrics above and beyond. Okay, there is palatability towards those solutions as well. I think that forms the second biggest tranche. The third is, basically picking up a foundational model. It could be an open source or a closed source model, and then trying to, fine tune it so that you can render on a certain kind of a use case. Okay, and then the fourth, very often never taken as an approach or a path, but we've seen this happen in, some adjacent sectors and also in some remote sectors, which is basically build a model ground up. We are seeing this happen quite, actively in life sciences. There's a protein language model now. We've seen this happen with financial services, like, say, for example, what Bloomberg did later part of last year, so on and so forth. But highly unlikely that this sector is going to be gravitating more towards the fourth form factor. Okay. Now, the critical component that we need to bear in mind about which way the company is going to go in terms of the solutioning end is, if you were to visualize the market into two broad tranches. Okay, the first tranche where you have a large company who have a dominant position in the market. Okay, the second tranche is the market space where there's a lot of competition intensity. Okay, a lot of smaller companies and the competition intensity is very high. Any form of productivity improvement, okay, if it is large or small, in the competitively dense market, if a company were to achieve, they will almost always get competed away, okay, because the competition intensity is very high. So all the benefits that you're trying to get out of this investment and deploying generative AI, will eventually get put back to end customers, okay? Whereas for those companies who are operating in dominant positions in the market, okay, even if it's a marginal productivity improvement, that directly hits their bottom line, okay? So what matters to these two companies is, what is the time to market to achieve the productivity, okay? So depending on that, their choice of adoption of the solution pathways will vary, okay? So in my view, I think the top adoption rate focus area that you will see over the in the shorter term period is mostly, leverage as much as possible on embedded AI and potentially go for commercially off the shelf solutions wherever there is maturity of the solution available. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Malay, I would just wanted to know, would you like to add your thoughts on this as well?
No, I think courses for courses, and I think Srikanth has just addressed that. I think there are multiple different solutions out there. There are companies who would want to operate at a and build foundational models. I mean, although it's a large scale investment which goes into it, but some sectors require that approach, so they will go down that path. Some companies would operate like analogous to PaaS kind of model, where they will leverage the LLMs, and then they would combine with their RAGs, etc. And then some companies would want even the data and insights to come from the market, and want a much faster time to market, and they don't want to necessarily spend weeks or months in terms of training the data, and they may not have all the capability themselves. They will leverage commercially off the shelf solutions, right? So I think it's going to be a mix of everything, but I think it's practically tied to what capabilities you have, how much investment you want to make, how much differentiated you want to stay. I think it will be a combination of all those approaches that will evolve in the market.
All right. All right, so we've got a bunch of questions still coming in. I guess this entire conversation was really intriguing to the audience, right? But since we have limited time today, what we're going to do is we will reach out to you to help you address those questions directly. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But thank you so much, dear panelists, for giving your thoughts here, engaging with the questions that the audience had, and for your sheer participation here. It's clear that generative AI has a transformative potential for the CPG industry. We look forward to seeing how these technologies continue to evolve and shape the near future. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their thoughts, and to our audience for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Have a great time. Bye-bye.